Jean Bedel Bokassa, the most useless leader, polygamist, and a shame of the 20th century, as narrated by Richard Mwanga. Jean Bedel Bokassa, also known as Bokassa I, was a Central African political and military leader who served as the second president of the Central African Republic and as the emperor of its successor state, the Central African Empire, from 1966 until he was overthrown in 1979. He was born in Bangui and studied at École Saint Louis under Father Gruna. His father was killed by the colonialists in 1927, and out of the pain, his mother committed suicide a week later. During the Second World War, he served with the African unit of the Free French Forces and took part in the capture of the Vichy government's capital. After the war, he attended officer training school in Saint Louis, Senegal, and headed to French Indochina as the transmission expert for the battalion of Saigon Cholon. He married a 17-year-old girl and returned to his home country in 1959. He later married 17 wives and had over 50 children. He was given the task of creating the new country's military and quickly rose through the ranks, becoming its first colonel in December 1964. He sought recognition of his status as the leader of the army and often sat next to President Dako. However, Dako found his cousin's tactics amusing and dismissed the likelihood that Bokassa would try to take control of the country. Bokassa plotted a coup d'etat against Dako in December 1965, receiving support from Captain Alexandre Banza, who commanded the Camp Kasai military base in northern Bangui. Banza gave orders to his officers to begin the coup, and Bokassa, Banza, and their supporters left Camp de Roux to take over Bangui around midnight. Dako was arrested by soldiers patrolling Petevo Junction and taken to Ngaraba prison, where Bokassa ordered prison director to release all prisoners. In the morning, Bokassa announced that Dako's government had resigned and a new era of equality among all had begun. Bokassa formed a new government and called the Revolutionary Council, invalidated the constitution and dissolved the National Assembly. He imposed a number of new rules and regulations such as proof of job. He abolished begging, top-tom playing, polygamy, dowry, and female circumcision. He also killed students who were unable to buy school uniform that were knit by his wife at $100 at a time when the people could hardly raise $150 a year. He also secured diplomatic recognition from President Francois of neighboring Chad, but had difficulty obtaining international recognition. He attempted to justify the coup by claiming that Izamo and PRC agents were trying to take over the government and that he had to intervene. When he took over the leadership of the country, Bokassa became a darling to the French as he allowed them to mine uranium and diamond. He also expelled all the Chinese nationals who had been invited into the country by the previous regime. Bokassa and Banza began to argue over country's budget, and Banza tried to obtain a support base within the army. Bokassa demoted Banza to Minister of Health, but let him remain a Minister of State. In September 1967, Banza asked for protection from French troops, and 2 months later, French government deployed 80 paratroopers to Bangui. Banza increased his voicing of dissenting political views, and a year later, after Banza made a number of remarks highly critical of Bokassa and the management of the economy, the president dismissed him. At his home in Birengo, Bokassa nearly beat Banza to death before he was convinced to put him on trial for appearance sake. On 12th April, Banza was sentenced to death by firing squad, taken to an open field in Camp Kasai, executed and buried in an unmarked grave. The circumstances of this death have been disputed, with Time reporting that Banza was dragged before a cabinet meeting where Bokassa slashed him with a razor, and Le Monde reported that He was killed in a circumstance so revolting that it still makes one's flesh creep. Later that afternoon, soldiers dragged the corpse of Banza with the spinal column smashed from barracks to barracks to give or to serve as an example to any other person who will try to revolt against Bokassa. In 1971, Bokassa promoted himself to full general and declared himself life president. Foreign support was provided by Libya, France, and China, and Bokassa's domestic and foreign policies became increasingly unpredictable, leading to an assassination attempt at Bangui Mpoko International Airport in February 1976. In 1977, France sent a battalion to secure the coronation ceremony of Bokassa, which cost 10 million Great Britain pounds, more than the annual budget of the Central African Republic. On 10th of October 1979, the French satirical newspaper reported that Bokassa had supplied France with uranium, which was vital for France's nuclear energy and weapons program in the Cold War. Bokassa's conversion to Islam was a ploy to ensure Libyan financial aid, but it clashed with his plan to be crowned the emperor in the Catholic cathedral in Bangui. He dissolved the government and replaced it with the Central African Revolutionary Council at Misan Congress. He converted back to Catholicism and instituted a new constitution that transformed the republic into the Central African Empire. He was formally crowned on 4th of December 1977, and his regalia, lavish coronation, and regime of the newly formed Central African Empire were largely inspired by Napoleon. He claimed that the new empire will be a constitutional monarchy, but in practice he retained the same dictatorial power he had held for the past decade as President Bokassa, and the country remained a military dictatorship. Bokassa, a mean and ruthless leader, stole from his community and ordered that anyone who was found stealing from the community should be mutilated. Their ears were cut off and their hands were amputated. Bokassa was overthrown in 1979 after food riot in Bangui led to a massacre of civilians and mass arrests of students, leading to the massacre of 100 students in Garaba prison. Operation Kaban began on 20th of September and ended early the next morning, with an undercover commando squad from the French intelligence agency SDECE and the 1st Marine Infantry Parachute Regiment securing Bangui Mpoko International Airport with little resistance. On 21st of September, the pro-French DACO proclaimed the fall of the Central African Empire and the restoration of the Central African Republic under his presidency. Bokassa fled to Ivory Coast and then went to France, where he was allowed to settle in his court in the suburb of Paris. He was tried for 14 different charges, including treason, murder, cannibalism, illegal use of property, assault, battery, embezzlement, and was presided over by the High Court Judge Eduardo Frank. The trial of Bokassa was widely watched in the Central African Republic and the neighboring countries. Bokassa denied all the charges and attempted to shift the blame away from himself. He was released on the 1st of August 1993 and returned in the Central African Republic for the rest of his life, proclaiming himself as the 15th apostle and claiming to have the secret meetings with Pope John Paul II. In 2010, President Francois Bozize issued a decree rehabilitating Bokassa and calling him a son of the nation. This rehabilitation of rights erases penal condemnation, fines, and legal costs, and stops any future incapacities committed during this period. Bokassa died on 3rd of November 1996 at the age of 75. Bokassa, a known cannibal, ate human flesh and even served some of the flesh to his unsuspecting foreign guests. He had a fridge in his basement where he kept human flesh for his foreign guests. And this is the history of Bokassa, the most useless leader of the Central African Republic.